Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Michael. I'm an executive director at Morgan Stanley. So in the next several minutes, I'll be your moderator. And I'm actually joined by Hendry Lieviant here. And maybe without further ado, to kick things off, maybe Hendry, you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us here. So my name is Hendry, the co-founder and CEO of Komunal. So Komunal is the first and only neo-rural banks fintech in Indonesia. We are partnering with 400 rural banks to solve for the financial inclusions in Indonesia.
Thanks, Hendry. So maybe let me just dive into the questions, right? And then at the end, the audience will have a chance to actually ask questions. But let me just kick things off, right? So Hendry, having worked in various financial institutions, right? And having seen various different opportunities in the market, right? What made you choose to focus on rural banking, BPRs?
So for everyone benefit, we're going to use the terms BPR, which is in Indonesia is Bank Perkreditan Rakyat. So literally means people economic banks, but it's translated into rural banks. So interesting questions. To be honest, initially when we started Komunal, it was not to focus on the rural banks, not to focus on the BPR. Our idea was simple because we see a huge financial inclusion issue in Indonesia. So we established a fintech lending for SMEs. So we are looking to provide loans for the SME, especially in the second and third tier cities where most of the gap is. But after a while, we realized that it's not as simple as doing a pure digital approach alone, because came outside the system, we thought that as long as we've got the data, as long as we've got the technology, then we should be able to tackle the financial inclusion from one place to all over Indonesia. But apparently, that's only one part of the equations. So the data only give us the ability to pay. But one thing that's being assumed, it might be true in the developed country where fintech was more developed, which is the willingness to pay. That's not automatically there in Indonesia, where the financial literacy is not that high yet. So we had an experience where we actually deploy a loan to SMEs outside Jakarta. All the data was good, but apparently people thinking that if you borrow from fintech, you can just uninstall the apps and then no one will know. It's a machine. It's not a human that they know. So that's where we thought that, hey, we have to partner with someone, or we need to open a branch across Indonesia, like what BRI and other microfinance does. But that's expensive. So we look for partners. And that's how we ended up with rural banks. Because these are regional banks licensed by the regulators. It's pervasive, 1,400 of them with 6,000 branches across Indonesia. So that's massive. And the good thing is they are often run by the owner-operator. And the owner-operator have been staying in the region for 20, 30 years. They have a very good local knowledge, local networks. So people feel bad if they borrow from the BPR and not paying back. Because to some degree, they will know either the owner or the employee of the rural banks, so they feel bad. So partnering with them is to increase the willingness to pay. So what we ended up doing is providing technology, human capital, financial capital to these rural banks, and they, in return, provide us with the good local contacts and networks. So hand in hand, that's actually strengthened both the ability to pay and the willingness to pay.
Great, thank you. Um, Maybe before I move on to the second question, right? Um, would you like to actually introduce the company a little bit more?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in Komunal, we do various services that's working with the rural banks. We started with Fintech lending, which helps the rural banks and the SME with the digital loans. So we do uncollateralized product, right? AR financing, supply chain financing, and working capitals. Some things that's perhaps not served yet or underbanked, right, by the commercial banks. And throughout the process, we actually also launched the deposit marketplace because we noticed that one of the reasons why this rural bank, although they are already in the remotest part of Indonesia, why they were not very effective is because the lack of financial capitals. They were not able to get the deposits that they should have because bulk of the deposits are in the big cities. And people in the big cities find it difficult or impractical to deposit into rural banks because they are not digitized. So we are facilitating that. Through one apps, people anywhere in Indonesia can deposit to rural banks everywhere without going to the branches. So this is something that was not there before. So ever since we had that, we actually managed to channel close to 800 millions of deposits to 400 rural banks across Indonesia. So that's helping them adding more firepower so that they can channel the loans in the second and third tier cities, right? And most recently, we also acquired rural banks ourselves as an innovation lab because it's very tough to digitize them. It's very tough to working with them when we don't have experience of running it ourselves. Yeah, and then lastly, we just built, and this is still in the beta version, the core banking system for them. Because at the end of the day, what we wanted to do is the end-to-end services, and what preventing us to go full digital, connecting these hundreds of rural banks, is their core banking system is actually very outdated one. They were built in 80s and 90s, so it's not very, very difficult to connect, right? So once we've got all the ecosystem in one place, our hope is we can marry the best of both worlds because we see that in a country as big as Indonesia, there are two types of financial institutions. The first one is the big banks, typically in the big cities. They are happy serving corporate commercials. On the other hand, you have smaller but agile financial institutions like these rural banks, cooperative. They are deep into the second, third, fourth tier cities, but they don't have the strength and muscles, and they ended up not competitive. So we are looking to marry the best of both worlds, how to be agile yet strong. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that confirms it, right? Because, I mean, having worked in various financial institutions myself, right? The idea and, you know, I've always feel that a lot of these things are still very manual, right? And do correct me if I'm going off tangent here, but BPRs, the rural banks, will be even more so, right? So I think that confirms it, right? So maybe the next question from me, right? You continue to build products, innovative products, right? Even unseen in other markets, right? Can you elaborate on the company's DNA, right? When it comes to solving pain points of the markets?
Thanks. So before I answer these questions, we have a video to give you a sense what rural bank is. Because when I talk to people about rural banks, people thinking that this is a bank with a farm beside it, there is a cow, there is a lamb. So that's not true. So please, operator.
Setelah bekerja sama dengan Komunal sejak tahun 2021, pertumbuhan aset BPR Nusumajati meningkat sampai 3 kali lipat, yaitu dari 150 miliar saat ini hampir mencapai 500 miliar.
Setelah adanya Komunal, jadi kami sudah mulai mampu untuk bisa lebih digitalize ya. Jadi mampu juga menyalurkan kredit tidak hanya di sekeliling jaringan kantor kami, tapi sudah bisa keluar daerah juga. Jadi cukup memberikan insight-insight baru bagi pertumbuhan industri dan terutamanya bagi Bank Kertiawan.
Setelah kami bekerja sama dengan Komunal, penyaluran kredit untuk usaha UMKM itu sangat mudah karena sumber likuiditas lebih mudah.
Sudah pasti sangat membantu sekali dari UKM-UKM yang ada di Bali. Jadi apabila mereka mendapat suatu kelebihan dana, mereka bisa disimpan, kemudian dan itu juga aman karena dijamin oleh LPS, kan demikian. Nah kemudian kalaupun umpamanya memerlukan dana untuk tambahan investasi atau bantuan modal kerja, itu juga bisa mudah untuk diakses.
All right. So when it comes to company DNA, we are always looking to solve the pain points that suffered by the majority of the peoples, right? Sometimes it's very, very tempting to just plug and pay the solutions that we see in other markets, like US and other developed countries, but we found out that the landscape is different. Innovations on products is only one part of the story. But what's more difficult is to convince them on why they should use our products. Because when we first came in, we didn't have any rural banks. They have run the rural banks for 20, 30 years. And it's been profitable, most of them. Actually, by statistic, 95% of them are profitable. And 95% of them are growing. And the rest of the 5%, they suffered because of the bad corporate governance, basically frauds, right? So as long as the owner is there, there is very high chance that these guys are doing okay, right? They don't need us because the industry is doing fine until COVID happened. So when COVID happened, as you can see from the video, people depositing money or lending, they have to meet them face to face. So when COVID happened, no one actually want to meet them face to face. So out of desperations, they try our product. They try to lend digitally. And they tried over and over again. Apparently it works. And now they have another problems because they keep throwing in the funds, they run out of liquidity. So actually the idea of deposit marketplace actually came from them, came from one of them. They suggested that if you can do it with the peer-to-peer lending, you should be able to do it. It's the same technology. What we haven't figured out is the regulations. So when finally the regulations support, and we were the first in the category, so when we applied it, the OJK didn't have the specific category for that, so they created the category for us because we are solving that bottoms up. So this is the problem that, and this is the solution that people really needs, right? So when that happened, that actually creating a flywheel in the sense that the deposit take up, they have more firepower, and then we enable them to lending, they can lend more, and we create a syndication platform whereby when their clients get bigger and bigger, they don't have to go to the bigger banks because the local SME have their own struggles. When their business growing and they need more loans, they often need to go to the bigger banks where the branch manager changes every 3 to 5 years. So they have to redo the relationship over and over again. Whereas with these rural banks, they know them inside out, right? So as long as these rural banks can serve them, then they're happy with it. And as the asset base grow, they can actually be more and more competitive. So there are few cities in Indonesia where the rural banks is very strong. Even some are even stronger than local commercial banks. Recently, I went to Batam. There was this big property development complex, about $15 million, that's financed by the rural banks. So it's a syndications of local 30 rural banks in the country. And the reason why they are not going to the commercial banks is because we already have a local connection with the rural banks, and the rural banks can do it. So they serve them ever since they were very, very early stage as a company, and then growing with them. So I think, back to your point, listening to what the market needs, I think that's very, very important. Although we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because sometimes they think the problem is A, but we ended up with B.
Wow, okay. That's very interesting, you know? I mean, yeah, everyone always talks about lending, right? When it comes to fintech, but rarely they talk about deposits. But okay, that's very, very interesting. And I was just going through your website a few days ago, right? And there's this word which captures me, which is ikigai. I never knew what it means, so I looked it up, right? So essentially it means purpose, right? So I guess one thing that I would like to ask you is, what does ikigai, or like purpose, means to Komunal, right? And particularly in this day and age whereby interest rates are high, right? How do you actually balance profitability, right? Scale, as well as addressing the pain points of the market?
Yeah, this is interesting questions, because it looks so complicated, but apparently it's not that complicated. It's down to solving the pain point that people feel it the most, right? In our case, in Komunal, we try to balance one, the growth, second, the profitability, and third is the impacts. So what we see is there are three groups of clients that contain our main stakeholders. One is SMEs in the second and third tier cities that sometimes they have to lose the business opportunity just because they don't have lending, they don't have funds. Second, there is hundreds or even 1,000 BPR that already have the local business in front of their eyes, but they are not able to serve because they are not digitized and they have lack of financial capital or deposit to do it. Lastly is a group of depositor in the big cities, people like you and me, who often have to choose when they depositing the money between convenience, safe instrument, or the high rates. You're often not able to get all three. You can either choose convenience and high rates, then you go to digital bank, but it's not guaranteed by the government if anything happens, or you go to the big banks who offer you convenience and low rate and safe, right? So what we are offering here is convenience, because you do everything by gadget, high interest rate, up to 6.75, and guaranteed by the government. So it's the best of three worlds. It's not both worlds, right? So when combining all these three, we ended up saying that people are willing to pay for the solutions that you provide. And they even want to pay more if the solution get better. Yeah, and they keep willing to give you feedback. So this is what we value the most. We often resist feedback or critics. But when people tell you that your product sucks, but continue to use your product, that's a sign to love. They love your product. It's just that they want it to be better. Yeah, and what's more interesting, that it created impact, right? Recently, I had a chance to brought a senior banker that just joined our team in Komunal to a trip to Bali and West Nusa Tenggara to meet a BPR. It's very heartwarming that one of the local BPR shared that we almost run out of money, whereas we have a lot of micro business to lend out. It's only when we receive a deposit from someone random that we do not know in Jakarta that we are able to continue lending. So actually the monies from people in Jakarta, they are going into the mountainside of the Lombok Islands without us knowing. And that's creating an impact. And they ask us, what does it take for us to be higher, to be sort higher in the list, right? If that means paying fee twice, we'll do it. Yeah, because it's still profitable, yet people feeling very thankful. Yeah, so this guy feeling that working in finance never been so satisfying.
That's good to hear. Maybe before I throw the questions to the audience, right? Let me just ask you one last one from me, right? So, as a financial technology company that is, enabling the BPRs, right? The rural banks, right? What trends do you see, both from the business side as well as the regulatory side, right? And so basically the trends that is emerging, right? The second one is how actually you are differentiating yourself from your competitor. Right?
Okay, so the recent trend is around consolidation. And this is quite unison both from the business and the regulator sides. The regulator wanted to reduce these 1,400 banks to around 1,000. And the reason is simple. All these licenses were given in 90s, 80s, where the initial capital requirement was only 30, 40K. So back then, if you have 40K USD, you can open a bank, right? But as the regulation, as the market continued to grow, and the regulation wanted the governance to increase and the infrastructures need increase, this amount of capital no longer sufficient. So what we need is a bigger, more robust, the BPR that run more professionally. So that's where the government is pushing, because after all, it's public monies that they are managing. On the business side, it's the same. It's very, very tough to run a small BPR. Actually, it's easier to run a bigger BPR, because then you have the economic of scale. You're able to do what you wanted to do, right? So that's the first trend. Second trend is they started to open up. Recently, early this year, the government issued a new law called UU P2SK, which allow the BPR to go public. This is the first time in the history that they were allowed to go public, and with that, accept foreign ownership. So I think this will make the industry more vibrant. Yeah. As to the differentiation point, I think combining the end-to-end services from deposit marketplace, lending syndication tools, core banking, with a bank in our ecosystem, and still partnering with 400 banks across 71 cities, I think that will enable us to serve the depositor and the small businesses better.
Yeah. Thank you, Hendry. So maybe let me invite the audience. If you have any questions, please do raise your hands and someone will come. Thank you.
Hi, Hendry. Great presentation. Amazing business model, I have to say. In your view, what do you see are the biggest challenges for the rural banks to adopt core banking systems, which I think is a key part of your strategy in making that happen? And given that so many of them need it, is there a way to do it in a platform-wise approach? Thanks.
Very good questions. So the challenge is, the rural bank have three challenges. The first one is, how do we deploy financial capital? Because now, lack of financial capital. Second, how do they brand themselves in such a way they can attract good talents? Because currently, even if they are able to pay, people choose to work for big banks, right? And lastly is the technology. So technology is only one part of that, right? But establishing the others will also help. So this is part of the triangle. So without the core banking system, some part of the services will continue to be manual, no choice. Even when we try to digitize them, all the transactions are going through your mobile apps, but they are still sending the physical paper bill to your house. And then they will collect it back. They'll send the courier back to take it when the deposit mature. But for those that using our core banking system, everything is digital. It's very similar experience like a digital bank, right? So, and yes, because we are actually creating a platform now, you can read my mind somehow. Because the core banking system take a while for people to adopt. It's not about deploying, but it's about the data migrations. That's a pain, right? So we're creating the light version where we are able to get the data, because that's what we need eventually, get their data, able to do the analysis. We know who is healthy, who is not, what sort of portfolio they have, and so on and so forth, and able to get all the product offering, our product, or probably in the future other product as well. I mean, some of the other financial products started to approach us to put it in the platform, right? So they can do everything in one platform. Yeah. That will so-called do 80% of the result with 20% of the effort.
Thank you, Hendry. Very insightful. I know we are short on time, right? If you have any questions, feel free to actually grab Hendry on the way out, right? But, I wish we have more time, but, thank you for the insightful discussion and all the best, Hendry.
Thank you, Mike.